We are going to get started. Thank you for coming. Again, looks like we got a bit of a smaller group tonight. I know another number of people couldn't make it tonight. So, all right, well, at least I got you guys here, so we'll get started. And it's too bad because we're starting something really cool. We are starting what I consider the second half of the book now, which is going to be shifting focus from everything we've seen until now. And I think it's kind of important. We're not going to actually get that far today. My plan is actually to only do one verse tonight, because first of all, it's a pretty jam-packed verse, but second of all, I think it's introducing something bigger to us. And we've talked about this before, in the sense that if you were to look at the book of Kohelet, if you were to look at the book of Ecclesiastes as it's written in scroll form, right, as it kind of should be, so to speak, as a Megillah. So if you found it written on scroll form, you would notice that it actually looks quite a bit different than, for example, some of the other Megillot, such as Esther or Ruth or really any of them. And the fact that it's really a big block of words, as opposed to, again, Esther has a lot of little breaks throughout the entire book, and kind of topic breaks. And again, same thing with nearly every book of the Bible. And when it comes to the book of Kohelet, there are actually very few breaks. In the entire book, there's only 2 breaks, making 3 sections. Now, we spoke about this all the way at the beginning, right? So if you wanted to catch up and look back at those earlier classes, we did discuss this earlier in our course. In fact, I forgot to do this right at the beginning, but let me just drop in the chat here. This is our link. So if you'd like to catch up, look back, kind of see what I'm talking about. We discussed this a lot at the beginning of the series, which again was back in last November. So this is a while ago. And actually, I've been kind of waiting for this point because we now have reached the second break. So the way it looks is the first 8 verses of the book are one section, just 8 verses. Then there's a little break, and then it went for the next 6.5 chapters or 5.5 chapters. And that's where we got up to last week, the end of the 6th chapter, which is the second break. And now we're going to have another just kind of brick of text all the way till the end of the book. So that's interesting. Again, that's not typical with books of the Bible. And when we realize that it's King Solomon himself who wrote this, and I assume he also set it up and how the text would look on the page. So there's some wisdom behind it. Again, King Solomon, wisest of all people, through the history of the world. All right, granted by God wisdom beyond all mankind. So he's doing something with this. And the way we've perceived it, at least until now, is that first section, that little tiny section at the beginning, was an introduction to the entire book. The second section, which was the bulk of everything we've seen so far, has been the discussion of happiness. And that's, how to achieve happiness. What do you do with happiness? How do you use it? How do you lose it? Right? So all those are important questions that we have to understand. And it was particularly the question of happiness from the material world, right? It tells us, he keeps on repeating over and over again, we're talking about tachat hashamesh, under the sun, right? So when things are under the sun, that means it's in the material world, okay? And that's been the discussion up until now. And he's approached it from multiple directions, from the point of view of power, to the point of view of money, influence, right? So a number of different ways, and he's approached how one would achieve happiness from the material world. And we've gotten a lot of information, kind of ideas about what that process looks like. And now he's moving into some second subject. Now, I've been racking my brains for weeks knowing that this is coming up and trying to figure out what is it that he's going to be discussing in the second half of the book. Now, I've learned the book a number of times already. In fact, at Kesser in previous years, last year I read it, and I've read it a number of years in different synagogues that I've been to. So I'm pretty familiar with the second half of the book. And if you were to ask me at first glance, what is its theme? It seems to be its theme is just thoughts of wisdom of Solomon, right? Solomon, different things that Solomon wants you to know. And that's I guess, a way to look at it, but I don't think it's a wise way to look at it, particularly for one major reason. And this is one of the things that was bothering me is he already wrote a book about his wisdom, right? He already wrote a book called Proverbs, Mishlei, where he already discusses his wisdom. He has 30 something chapters there, right? I think it's 35 chapters altogether. So we already have a book of Chachmas Shlomo, of the wisdom of Shlomo, of the wisdom of Solomon. So then what is it that he's trying to do now in this second half of the book? And we're going to see it's kind of here, there, and everywhere at first glance. And I don't like to look at the book that way. In general, I don't like to look at the book that way. And in fact, until now, we've been very successful at understanding how verses that don't necessarily link with each other are actually very much linked, and they are telling us a story. They're giving us a narrative. And it's actually worked out very well so far. So there has to be something new that King Solomon's planning on doing with this second half of the book, right? Kind of Kohelet part 2, that he's trying to be giving us something new to chew and to think over. And so that's where I've been stuck, because for weeks now I've been looking at the verses and trying to figure out what's the theme, what's the major idea that he's doing. Again, we could just look at it as a kind of a dump of the wisdom of Solomon. Here you go, a lot of interesting thoughts. And if you look at it, if you look at what the sages have to say about it, they seem to indicate such a thing. That's where they get into their issue of that there's some phrases that seem to contradict each other. Because in this verse over here, he's going to say one thing, and in another verse, a couple chapters later, he's going to say something else. They seem to contradict each other. Now, and as it is, the sages did come out with understanding that it's not true. It's not a contradiction. He's trying to teach us a deeper lesson. But what is it? What is it that he's trying to do? What is his theme in this part 2 of the book of Kohelet? And then I was thinking about it more, and I realized that the book of Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, from the very beginning started with an introduction, right? We talked about those first 8 verses. That was kind of an intro to the book. And then, if you recall, again, if you want to look back at some of the previous episodes, it turns out that the first couple verses of the first part of part 1 were also a bit of an introduction. So looking at it, it's more likely than not that he's going to introduce something before he talks about it. That seems to be his system. And again, when we're talking about a person of such great wisdom, it's only likely that he would do such a thing, right? He's a very systematic person, very as is clear from his text. So therefore, he's probably going to introduce what he's saying. So in that case, we really have to take a look at these first couple of verses that we're going to see in chapter 7, and we're going to have to look at that as an intro to part 2 of the book, because again, that is the system that King Solomon follows in writing this book. So now that we have that understanding, now we can take a look at the first verse, and in the light of it being an intro. Now, it's not going to look like it at first glance, but we have to understand it like that because that's how the book works. So if that's how the book works, we have to look at it as an intro into part 2. And once you look at it that way, it actually starts to come into focus a little bit more about what he's planning on doing. Okay. So with that all being said, that was a long intro to get to the point of let's pull up the share screen and we'll take a look at it together. Okay, let me set up my screen here on my side. Okay, yeah, let me make this a little bit bigger because we're only looking at this first verse over here. That's chapter 6. Here's chapter 7. Okay, and this is a very short verse and very simple verse, but we're going to look at it again as a point of introduction, and just also to kind of strengthen my point of this being a new section. I find it interesting that the first letter over here is larger, right? Again, if you were to look at it in the actual book if you are to look at it in the scroll form, written on a scroll, you would note that the letter tes over there, letter tet, is actually larger than the letters surrounding it. Okay, kind of like what we would do. It has a chapter heading in a book in English, right? We would very often, one of the things we could do is we could put a drop cap to make the letter larger as a section intro or section header, But that's exactly what I would seem at first glance that he's doing over here. Okay, so again, a very short verse. Let's take it piece by piece. Tov shem mishemen tov. A name is good, is better than good wine. I'm sorry, not wine, good oil. Let me say that again. Tov shem. A name is better, mishemen tov, than good oil. V'yom hamavet miyom hivolado. And the day of death is better. It's not spoken out over there, but it is in the same way than the day of birth. Okay, the day of death is greater than the day of birth. All right, so again, let's see that one more time. Tov shem. A name is better, mishemen tov, than good oil. Of Yom HaMavet, and the day of death, Yom Hivalado, from the day of birth. All right, again, using that same, it doesn't speak out the tov over here, but it's it's doing the same kind of level of contrast. So just like a name is better than good wine, I keep on saying wine, good oil, so too the day of death is better than the day of birth. Okay, again, our focus when we look at the book of Kohelet over here is to understand that he's not trying to bring us down. On the contrary, he's trying to bring us up. Right? He's trying to encourage us. So we're not going to be happy to just say that he's saying, yeah, life is silly, life is stupid, better to die than to be born. But he's not saying that. Okay, we're going to have to understand that he's not saying that. So once again, we have two contrasts over here. We have a name as opposed to good oil, and death as opposed to birth. Okay. Now there's a number of things that we're just to point out off the top of the right off the bat. Number one is this word tov. All right, good. So we've seen the word tov multiple times now, and so far it's been actually at the end of a concept. So usually what we've seen in the past couple chapters is that he talks about an idea for a little bit, and then at the end of talking about that he says tov blah blah blah. Okay, good is this. So he gives us kind of the what's not good, what's not good, what's not good, and then at the end he says, what's really good, this is real good. In that contrast, that contrast form, again, or the dialectic, right? Looking at something in one way and then in the other. So here he's just jumping directly into what's good. In fact, in these first couple verses over here, I'm just going to scroll down. We have tov, 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 verse 5, tov, verse 8, tov. We've got verse 11, tova, because it's feminine in that verse over there. So in this chapter, there's one more in verse 18, and that seems to be it for this chapter. Okay, so there's 6 times that he's gonna. Sorry for making you queasy over here, going up and down like that. But okay, so there's already going to be 6 times in this chapter that he's going to go and talk about things being good. So that's already interesting. It seems to be him veering from his system so far. Again, I would say that he's not necessarily veering entirely. What he's doing is he's giving us words of introduction. And so when giving us words of introduction, he doesn't have to give us that dialectic system that he usually does of here's the bad, but here's the good. But he's just going to say, we're going to be talking about this for the next little bit. What is good in this area? Now, we still haven't spoken out what is this area that we're talking about. And so we'll get into that in just a second. The second thing I want to point out, just from an interesting Hebrew perspective, is that he does a kind of a word play, right? Tov shem mishemen tov. Okay, it's a good name, or a name is better than good oil. Okay, shem meaning a name, right? That's a 2-letter shoresh, a rare 2-letter Hebrew root. Usually Hebrew roots are 3 letters, but this is a 2-letter one. Shem, it's a noun meaning a name. Okay, and then here we have a 3-letter noun, shemen, which is oil. Now, obviously, we do understand that in general, if you look at Hebrew like many of us do, that the letters have a lot of wisdom behind them. There's got to be some connection over there between oil and names. I don't necessarily know what that is. Just on one foot, I would perhaps be able to say that oil was often used as a form of inaugurating something into something new, christening something. So in that sense, right, when we had a king or a high priest, we would anoint them with oil, right? It was called Mashiach, right, which is where the word Mashiach comes from, right? The Messiah meaning the one who was christened. Again, kind of funny to say christened in that sense, but obviously we're yeah. Anyway, so I would say that perhaps there's a relation over there between the two words. That oil was a tool that was often used for renaming something, for giving it something its new essence. And it also, in that sense, they also share a kind of a meaning behind them. That a name is a person's essence, right? They are identifiable by their name. Oils are also the essence of a fruit, okay? So you have avocado oil, olive oil, vegetable oil, all these oils. It's when you squeeze that thing, what comes out in the end is the oil. So nothing to do with what we're talking about, but just from a Hebrew perspective, it's interesting to know that the words are related. They probably share some characteristics. That's just a truth of Hebrew, right? When we believe that this language was used to create the world, so it makes sense that there would be relationships between different words that share letters. So over here, we have these two words that share characteristics. At the same time, we have King Solomon giving us a bit of a tongue twister, or if you want, it's a, not necessarily a tongue twister, but it's more it flows from the tongue. It sounds good, it's poetic. So Tov Shem Yishem and Tov, right? It flows very well. But again, a name is good than good oil. Now, what is a name in this sense? I don't think we're talking about a name in the sense like, my name is Akiva, and that's what we're talking about. I assume we're talking about a name as in a reputation. And I think that's really what we're going to be harping on is in this next, in part two, what he's kind of introducing over here, is that he's going to be talking about the idea of interpersonal relationships. So until now, again, we've spoken about happiness, how to achieve happiness from the material world. Now he's moving on to part two. Part two of the book of Kohelet, I'm going to offer, is going to be talking about how to build, maintain, and avoid bad relationships. Okay, so I think that's what he's going to be discussing in these coming chapters. And this is his intro. First intro number one is a good name. A name that is good, a good reputation will get you a lot farther than good oil. Now, good oil, right? Who cares about oil, right? It's not, in our world, oil is not that exciting. Except for natural oils, black gold, if you will. But that's not really what we're talking about. We're not talking about, natural gas. We're talking about actual oil. So what is it about oil that's not as good as a good reputation? And actually over here, the rabbis come in, the sages come in, and they give us some interesting contrasts between a good reputation and good oil. This is brought down in the Midrash in a number of places. It's presented a couple different ways in a couple different places throughout the words of the sages, the words of Chazal. However, but they say they list a number of differences between oil and a reputation. Kind of funny comparing apples and oranges in that way, but there are really contrasting, but there is a contrast between the two things. And for example, they say that oil is bound by gravity, right? It flows downwards. It actually brings a verse that says that the oil that was in Aaron's beard, Aaron is the brother of Moses, the oil that was in his beard dripped downwards to the end of his beard. Okay, there's actually a verse that says such a thing. Kind of a funny thing to say. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there also. Okay, but so again, oil is bound by gravity. It will naturally drip downwards, as opposed to a good reputation. Reputation will rise, right? So kind of that it will rise up. It is not bound by gravity. Similarly, oil is limited by time, right? I guess in the sense that it will go bad at a certain point. It can't last forever, as opposed to a good reputation can last forever. Oil can literally run out. You can run out of oil. You can use it and use it and use it, and eventually it will run out, as opposed to a good reputation. Oil costs money. You have to buy oil, as opposed to a good reputation. Doesn't necessarily cost you anything. It could potentially cost you something, but it's not the money that makes a reputation what it is, right? It's the money that makes the oil what it is, right? And at the end of the day, if you want good oil, you're going to have to pay more money. Oil only benefits the living, right? Once a person passes from this world, you could douse them in oil all day long. They're not going to appreciate it. They're not going to enjoy it, right? In previous times, they would use oil as a as a moisturizer. Um, Actually, there's a whole piece of halacha of Jewish law regarding washing hands after a meal. And part of the process in previous times was after they would wash the hands. So when you wash with water, you can lead yourself to dehydrating the skin. So they would then rub oil on it. Similarly, on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av, we do not anoint ourselves in oil. Again, not so common to us nowadays, but this was a common practice in previous times. So it only benefits the living. Only a living person is benefiting from oil being poured on their skin. Somebody who's not living does not get that benefit. Again, as opposed to a reputation. A good reputation is something that can last beyond a person's lifetime. So even after the person passes, they're still going to benefit from a good reputation. Also, good oil, specifically Shemen Tov, good oil, is you're only going to find that amongst the wealthy. Only the wealthy really know what to do with good oil. The only ones who know how to access it, who can afford it, as I mentioned before. But they're the only ones who really get to benefit from it, as opposed to a good reputation. Doesn't matter how wealthy you are, you could have and benefit from a good reputation. The scent of a good oil, right? If we're talking about a perfume, can only go a short distance. The way the rabbis put it is, you can smell it in the next room over. But a good reputation could go from one end of the world to the next. By the end of the day, your name can be as famous as anybody's. Another interesting thing is that, again, kind of going back to the idea of somebody who's alive, or who are living and who are not living, if you actually pour oil on a dead body, it actually ruins the oil. The oil itself is not pleasant anymore. It will pick up the decomposition of the dead body. Kind of a weird one that they say, but again, a good reputation will benefit even from a dead body, from somebody who's already passed away. Another thing, there's only two more of these. Oil is washed away can be washed away by water, right? Actually, it's a little difficult too, but okay. If you have oil in a cup and you pour water in the cup, the water will push the oil to the top and move it away, meaning to say that oil is washed away by an opposing force, right? If it has forces come against it, it will lose its status, as opposed to a good reputation. If it's good enough, it will be able to last through an opposing force. And finally, oil, when it falls into fire, burns. It's a fuel for fire, as opposed to a good reputation, specifically a good reputation in this case, that is not burned in fire. Okay, whether that's literal or some sort of allegory, whatever it is, all these things are to some degree an allegory. It's very clear that's what King Solomon is doing over here. He's giving us some sort of allegorical idea. He's giving us both an allegory and an alliteration in one verse. So again, he says that a name is better than oil in all these ways. Again, this is the sage's interpretation that, look, oil is huge. Oil was, in the times of the Talmud, in the times of our sages, oil was such an important commodity. It was very expensive. It was very useful, right? They didn't have electricity, so oil was an important thing to have around your house. It cost you a lot of money. It was how you kept yourself, again, your skin hydrated and moisturized. It was how you would keep yourself smelling good in days when they didn't bathe as well. So good oil is actually very important. And with all that, we understand that as important and as beneficial a good oil is, a reputation goes much farther than that. It goes much farther in all these ways we mentioned. And the basic gist being, the common denominator of all these things, is that there's a lasting quality to a good reputation. As opposed to oil is, at the end of the day, it's a physical material item. It will either run out, it will spoil, it will get burned, it will come in contact with something that makes it go bad, it will get washed away by water. And at the end of the day, something is going to ruin your oil. It will not last forever. The difference being that a good reputation can last forever. All right. I was just watching something last night about somebody pointed me in the direction of some art history stuff, and it was talking about Charlemagne and art in the times of Charlemagne. And I was kind of thinking to myself, like, this guy Charlemagne, he's around 1,000 years ago, and we're still talking about him. and he still influences the world. It's pretty incredible, and changed the course of history in many, many ways. And there's a number of people, but billions of people, maybe not billions, but thousands of people throughout the history of the world who their name lasts forever. We will never forget who these people are. And it's quite an amazing thing, as opposed to a jar of oil. In the end of the day, a jar of oil will disappear. Even our miraculous oil by Hanukkah, by the story of the Maccabees, eventually it burned out after 8 days. It was miraculous oil. It was oil from who knows when in history. It was something special. And then the end of the day, it burns out, or it goes away. And as opposed to a good reputation, or even a bad reputation, if you think about it, lasts forever. So a name, just a reputation in general, is something that is so much more important than oil. Oil, again, being this super important commodity, a reputation will go much farther than that. And the fact, and the sense that a reputation is not, lacks a lasting quality. It doesn't have the ability to last as long as we love it to. I think there's also kind of another mini lesson over here. He's making his little statement over here. And if you wanted to tie this in with the last piece, which we could, I'm not opposed to it. I just don't think we are. I don't think it's necessarily doing that. But we've been talking recently in the recent chapters about wealth. I think another thing he's kind of trying to say over here is that, so using good oil as a metaphor for wealth. So wealth, reputation is more important than wealth. Wealth, if you're looking to make your relationships with other people, to build your relationships with other people, if you're looking to do that based on wealth, it's going to be limited. It's going to be, there's only so far your money can take you. Again, as opposed to if you have a reputation of being actually a good person, then it will take you a lot farther, right? Yeah, I mean, we can all think of a recent example of a very wealthy person who may have become a very big sensation in the media for a number of years. And at the end of the day, his reputation has been severely tarnished, or and his power gets weakened by that. So money doesn't take you everything. It's a reputation would take you a lot farther than that. So with that in mind as being our focus over here. So now we're looking at something else. We're not looking at happiness anymore. Obviously, happiness, it still plays a role. We're gonna see it show up every once in a while here and there in the coming chapters. But now that we're moving our focus away from happiness, it kind of makes sense that he right now repeats something that he's spoken about, or at least hinted to a number of times, that the day of death is greater than the day of birth. Okay, Yom Hamavet Yom Hivolado. The day of death is greater than the day of birth. Now, I know this already. I've been reading the book so far. He's told me a number of times already why the day of death is greater than the day of birth, and it's kind of funny for him to show us again this idea. Now, again, every time that he's said this, and every time that he will say this, we have ways of understanding it that don't come off as that move it away from the face value, because I think that's important. He's not trying to bring us down. He's trying to encourage us. So, but it makes sense over here why now he's going to be telling us again that the day of death is greater than the day of birth, because he's talking about a new subject over here. And this is the subject of the interpersonal relationships, of the reputation, of the making a name for yourself, of dealing with and getting close to the people around you. In that sense also, I would say the day of death is greater than the day of birth. And in a similar way to what we're saying, good oil, right? Good oil, we said, is great. It's an amazing thing, but it doesn't last forever. And it has lost some of its, or eventually will lose some of its power after a period of time, or all of its value after a certain period of time. And it's the similar way with the day of birth. When a person is born, there's so much potential there. There's so much possibility for this child. There's so much that this child can do with their lives. And we just don't know what it's going to be. So in that sense, it's really a day of, if anything, it's a day of tremendous anxiety. What is this child going to look like? Let's just look at the reputation. This kid has no reputation. Everything is going to be based on what it does in its coming years. That's a scary thought. What's going to be? It's all, again, it's a beautiful thing. It's an amazing thing. It's good oil, but that we don't know what's going to happen with it. It doesn't have that lasting quality, that finality that the day of the death does. Same way that the oil does not have the same thing. It does not have the same finality, I guess, as or lastingness as a good reputation. So the day of the death, as on the contrast, is where we are able to look at a person in their entirety. Everything that they have done, everything that they could have done, they did do. Everything that they didn't do, they, we're able to look at the entirety of a human being. There's nothing more left up to chance. We now have everything. We have the full picture of the human, of the person. We're able to say, that's so-and-so. There's no more, nothing is left to potential anymore. It doesn't have the potential, that frightening potential of a newborn child. It's a complete and totally finished human. And that will guide us in understanding their reputation. There's nothing they can do anymore to improve or disrupt their reputation. Their reputation is what it is. They will be like that forever. It's kind of locks into place. It's locked in forever once you get to that point, which is a frightening thought for most of us, I would say. But at the same time, what he's saying is you want to look at what makes a person who they are. You can't look at a child when they're first born. That's where you just see potential. You don't see the actual person. Where you do see a person where we're able to walk away and take lessons, that's from the person who's passed. That we could look at them and say, okay, this person, this is their reputation. This is where they did right. This is perhaps where they did wrong. This is where I could learn from. This is where I could learn not to be. Maybe he's going to flesh that out in the second verse, where he talks about it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to a party, to a house of drink. We'll talk about that more in next week when we get into the second chapter. Like good oil, a child who's just born can go bad. However, when you reach the point of mavet, of the day of the death, everything is decided. And now the ability for a reputation can fully come into play. And there's nothing that can build it or ruin it any further. So with that, again, here we now start to see, this is the beginning of his intro now to this part 2 of the book of Kohelet. Until now, again, we've been talking about happiness. Now we're talking about something new. His intro to it is this idea of a reputation. You want to make sure that you come off reputably, that you come off in a way that people appreciate. And that's going to be an intro into discussing in general the idea of interpersonal relationships. That's what he's going to be talking about and focusing on in the coming chapters. And okay, that is all we will do for tonight. Let me stop the share here and bring us back to the main room. Okay, that's it for tonight. Thank you for coming. Tell your friends. Again, if you'd like to catch up on anything, you could check out our link that I put it in the chat. And I'm glad to have you here.